Good morning, comrades.
Good morning.
How are you going, Beth?
That sounded very Soviet.
Dear. So another day, another joy.
Yes.
You had a brief time away, is that right?
I did. I did have the first week of the school holidays off.
Ah, very good.
Which was mostly off. You know what it's like. It's never quite 100% off. But
sadly, yes. Yes, indeed.
But I actually discovered I was more tired when I came back to work.
Oh dear, yes, there can be that, can't there?
Yes, but no, it was nice to be away from this place.
Yes. So you look like you're in your office at Wait there, is that right?
I am, yep.
Okay, good.
So Matthew, are you happy to monitor the chat, or will you do that, Suzanne?
Hi everyone.
Hi, Suzanne.
I'm happy to help with the chat. I do have to leave half an hour early because I've got a clashing meeting problem. So I won't be able to do it for that last half an hour. But I'm happy to do it up until my departure.
Awesome. Because if people are suggesting, go faster, go slower, just let me know.
No worries. I will do that.
Yeah, I suppose we'll just give it a few minutes for people to join us.
Yes.
There's a nice background, Chi. Bit of grasslands going on. That's good. Suzanne, you got a nice painting. That's very good.
Yes, I'm at home today. So
excellent.
a bit nicer than my tidy office. I've just focused it this way so you can't see the rest of the house.
That's right. The only part of my entire existence that is clean is the bit behind me. So people that know me will be familiar, unfortunately, with the state of my office. And I'm afraid the home office is much the same as the work office in this respect.
Yes, it's quite helpful that you can kind of narrow the focus on something, isn't it?
It is.
Can you guys hear me? I'm having trouble getting myself set up.
Hey, Tony. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. All I got to do is find my camera now, and I'm not sure I want it because I'm working at home, and we've got a building site going on in the room that I'm in. So
well, it could provide us some entertainment.
Yeah, they're not here yet. So having a new kitchen installed.
Oh, excellent. Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's an expensive thing.
Yeah,
Morning,
well.
everyone.
Tony. Very nice classes.
Thank you.
Yes, morning, everyone. And morning, Lacey. You're just back from a bit of time off, is that right?
Hi. Yes, I am, but in fact, I'm technically on sick leave today because I had a procedure yesterday, so I can't drive the car. But here I am.
Oh, well, it's very nice to see you, and all the best for a speedy recovery.
Thank you. Hopefully I should be back on deck fully tomorrow.
Great.
I wonder if we should perhaps kick off, just because I'm keen that we make the most of this time together. And as people join, they can, I'm sure, work out where we're at. So welcome everybody to this Professions L&T session on online exams. And I'm very pleased to welcome our presenters today. In particular, we have Beth Lovies, who's, I think, the university expert now on online exams. So she's going to kick us off. And then Matthew is going to provide some local content. Matthew Stubbs, who is also here, and he has very kindly organised some colleagues as well to talk about their specific ways that they've used online exams in semester 1 and trimester 1. So we have with us, I think, Jessica Vivian Welsh, Janice Loftus, Mark Giancaspero, Virginie Masson, and Gabrielle Golding, Colette Langos as well. So that is quite a full session. We will be using the chat to collect up questions or comments, so please feel free to jump in there at any point. Unfortunately, I will have to depart before the end of the session because I have clashing meetings, so I'm going to love and leave you at some point quietly. So I'd like to offer my particular thanks to the presenters in advance because I won't be around to do that thank you at the end. But I'm really grateful for everyone giving up their time today to talk about the exciting things that we're doing in online exams and ways to navigate the next semester of online, this semester of online exams as well, which I'm sure is pressing on everyone's mind right now. So Beth, can I throw to you to kick us off, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Suzanne. Hopefully everyone's now seeing a PowerPoint slide. So a little bit of history, just to set the scene. This workshop has been a travelling roadshow around the university. It's been modified for every school or faculty in which it has been presented. And I have tried to narrow the focus a little bit, given that we are now at the very pointy end of semester. And so I don't want to give you more information than you need right now. So this is sort of designed to be quite a focused and targeted thing. And as Suzanne mentioned, Matthew has really kindly provided or sourced a lot of examples that are going to be hopefully much more relevant than ones that I could pull out of my own school, which is the School of Agriculture, Food and Wine. Okay, so let's make a start. So first of all, I would like to make an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge and pay respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. So after today's session, I'm hoping you'll have some takeaway things that you feel like you can go and actually do right now to get your online assessments up and running. The first learning outcome there is more broadly about assessment, and I've put that in there to, I guess, encourage you to think about your exam in conjunction with all the other assessment tasks that happen in your course. I think sometimes we fall into the trap of thinking that the exam is somewhat separate from the rest of the assessment activities. And I think if you can keep that in mind, you might actually find that there are less learning outcomes that need to be assessed in the exam because you've already assessed them in other parts of your course. The final two are specifically about the online exams or online assessment. And I hope I give you some examples, and that actually probably won't be me, that'll be mostly people from your own faculty giving you really great examples of the way that they delivered assessment last semester. And that'll hopefully encourage you to design or redesign an assessment task that is very contextually relevant to your discipline. I would also be really encouraging you to think very carefully about your communication strategy with regard to communicating to your students what you're going to expect them to do, how you're going to expect them to do it, and as much information as you can provide them about the assessment task. Research shows that the more prepared students are with regard to what they're going to have to do, how they're going to have to do it, and why they're going to have to do it, the less chances there are of breaches of academic integrity. Okay, so this is just to briefly put you in the picture about where we are for semester 2. I'm hoping you are all, none of this should be a surprise to anybody. We are all in a situation where we have non-invigilated open book online exams, and the university is trying to reduce breaches of academic integrity through the careful design of that summative assessment. Now, I will say right here, there is no magic or silver bullet that protects against breaches of academic integrity. And so I want you, I guess, to take the pressure off yourself a little bit in terms of you can do your absolute best to try and reduce academic integrity by designing a sensible, authentic, and very based in your course assessment, but there's nothing that's 100%. I've got that point down the bottom that in some schools there was the possibility to have face-to-face exams in department. I don't know whether that's a situation in your particular faculty. I know in ours, many people applied to have them and none of them were approved. So I'm guessing for that's probably a moot point right now, but it's there for completeness. Okay. After the semester 1 exams, the university did an enormous survey, focus group, working group, whatever you want to call it, to gather information from the whole university about what happened in semester 1. And this was a 75-page document that was collated by the online exams working group, and I've just pulled out a tiny bit of that, just to give you a bit of a feel for what happened across the whole university. So the majority of people used a quiz through my uni, followed by a file upload, and then some people used a combination of those two. The other there were a few oral exams and a couple of sort of, I guess, take-home exams as opposed to timed exams on my uni. When people were asked, would you still use a final exam in semester 1? Most people said they would, so they wouldn't push all their assessment back into the teaching period. They would still use an exam in the examination period. So that suggests, I guess, that most people weren't too traumatized by the final exam situation and thought they would probably be doing it again this semester. So I'm guessing that most of you are sitting in that bit of the bar chart there saying, yes, I am going to be doing one and I have to get it sorted probably by sometime the end of next week, if you haven't already. When academic staff were asked about their concerns about academic integrity, interestingly, about 30% of staff said they didn't have any concerns about academic integrity. I haven't met any of that 30% in my travelling around the university. Everyone I've spoken to has been concerned about academic integrity. So 48% said they did have concerns, and then of that 48%, 92% reported breaches, suspected breaches. So there was certainly an increase in reports of breaches of academic integrity after the online exams last semester. So let's hope we have a bit less of that this semester, and hopefully you can come away from this with a few ideas about how you might reduce the chances of that in your courses. So one of the first things I did when I was asked to put this travelling roadshow together was I thought I need to speak to some students and find out what their experience of exams was actually like. And one of the questions I asked them was about how they structured their revision. Because I think many students struggled with how do I revise for an open book, open web, open Google, whatever you want to call it, exam. So I'll just play this. There are captions down the bottom, but hopefully you'll be able to hear it as well.
Yeah, I would say that immediately from the first exam to the second, it changed completely. Because the first exam I prepared pretty much like I would prepare for any other exam, except obviously the organisation of materials became absolutely paramount. But what really changed from the first exam to the second was that you realised that your memory doesn't matter anymore.
I felt a lot less pressure going in. I didn't probably work as hard to memorise the content. So sort of just coming up with really good answers. Pressure was a bit less.
So that's just a very small snapshot of the way students approached their revision. And I think if we can think about how students are revising, that helps us to understand the things that are going to be anxiety inducing to them in a different way that they would have had we been doing closed book invigilated exams. So also coming out of that exams working group were some focus group responses from students, and students were asked about what they liked, in inverted commas, or how they perceived final exams. And interestingly, the majority of them, now you've got to keep in mind, these are students who put their hand up to attend a focus group, so they are a very particular cohort of students. But they said they actually liked having a final exam. They wanted to have a final exam because it allowed them to demonstrate integration of knowledge gained over a course. It allowed them to demonstrate their ability to apply knowledge. And it also demonstrated not only to themselves, but also to their teachers that they were ready to move on, whether that's to the next semester of study or whether that's off out into the big wide world as a career. So I guess I thought that was interesting and useful to keep in mind, that there is certainly a cohort of students that are really keen to show you as their teacher what they've learned and what you have taught them over a semester. And I think if you think about an exam in that way, it might change the way in which you approach putting together the questions for an exam. So just really briefly, I guess what we mean by exam is that it's an approach to assessment, not a type of assessment. So generally exams are considered an assessment of learning rather than an assessment for learning. I will actually dispute that in a few slides' time. So I guess kind of keep that thought in your mind. Generally, when we talk about an exam, we're talking about a restricted time and place where that particular assessment task is performed. Now, clearly in our current environment, the time might be constrained, but the place is no longer constrained. Students can be doing exams anywhere. And I found those lovely pictures of Wayville just in case people are feeling nostalgic about that quite hideous situation when you walk into Wayville and you can feel the stress in the air. We don't have that this semester. Okay, I'm going to run through this little exam decision tree quite quickly because I feel like most of you have probably made the decision about how you're going to run your exam already. I've kept it in there though, partly because you guys are going to get these slides at the end of the session. And I thought it might be a useful reference for semesters to come, even if not now. So the way I've put this together is using Bloom's taxonomy, which I'm sure you're all well and truly aware of, as a way of kind of chunking the types of content and knowledge that might be in your courses. So the first thing that I think is important to do is remind yourself which of your learning outcomes do you need to test in the exam. Have you already tested them in other assessments? If you have, do you need to test them again? If there are learning outcomes that still need to be tested, those are obviously the key ones that you need to think about when you're designing your exam. So then chunking the types of content and knowledge based on Bloom's taxonomy, you might have knowledge that is really just recall, classify, identify, list, and apply. You also might have information that needs to be interpreted or students to solve problems. Thirdly, you might have information that you want the students to demonstrate to you that ability to connect and integrate information, or you might indeed want them to create a significant original work. Now, this one sort of sits a little bit out on its own, and you'll see the ways that I think that can possibly be tested coming up. So I guess these are the types of formats that are most commonly used in the exam scenario. So we've got a multiple choice quiz, a short answer quiz, an open book exam, which I guess all of these are going to be. So this kind of falls, this is an umbrella term really, but what I mean here are extended answer, I suppose, longer answer and with a bit more integration. And then we've got this take home exam, which our exam timetable doesn't support, but it's there just again for completeness. So down here, I've got a few characteristics which I think sort of commonly would be identified with these different types of assessment, and also some possible solutions of improving academic integrity or reducing the risk of academic integrity breaches. So generally a multiple choice quiz would be under time pressure, and probably under a significant time pressure. So maybe 30 seconds to a minute maximum per question. If you've got question banks, really great way of delivering different questions to different students. I think most of us would use the shuffling answers tool in my uni to reduce the chances of students telling each other that it's A, C, D, E, F as the answers. Using formula questions is really valuable. I don't do it myself, but I have had a lot of people tell me how useful it is. People who have equations, perhaps balance sheets, you can switch numbers in and out. And then 5 choices reduces the chances of guessing, but 5 is only a good number if all 5 answers are plausible. If you have a sort of a flippant answer or an all of the above or none of the above, then you may as well just have four choices. That's what the literature says in terms of the rigor with which a multiple choice quiz can assess a student. Short answer quizzes also usually done under significant time pressure. One really interesting way of improving academic integrity is to add a reflective question. And by that, what I mean is a question which reflects specifically on a particular part of your course. So not necessarily a question about how did you feel or what did you think, but more about there was a particular part of the course where we studied this. Can you give me another example where that situation might be relevant or something like that? So you're really embedding your question deeply within your course content. This is a bit of a controversial one. Some people love this idea. Some people think it's terrible, but adding a question where students upload a selfie at the end of the exam to show you where they were when they did the exam. I've been told by people that know a lot more about this sort of stuff than me that it's very easy to edit the metadata that sits behind anything like that. So a photo can come from anywhere, anytime. I'm not sure I would ever use that, but it's just there as an idea. An open book exam tends to be under probably a slightly less time pressured, but nonetheless a time pressured situation. You might have longer answer questions. You might have some choice in those questions. Again, useful to add a reflective question. If you do this as an upload rather than a My Uni quiz, you can obviously then put that through, turn it in. So that's a really nice way of picking up any plagiarism and possibly picking up collusion if you're concerned about that.
Beth, can I just ask you a question on that?
Yes,
when you say open book exam, because it's taken in online, so students can have the open book, but it does not necessarily mean the questions that we draft are necessarily reflect the ideal open book exam conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
we do understand that they have got the book, but we also, I think, need to remember that our exams are not necessarily reflecting the characteristics of an open book exam. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. So I'm hopefully going to give you some ideas about writing exam questions that are designed specifically for this open book, open web scenario. And people have said to me that they call it an ungoogleable answer. So it's a question which is not possible to just Google the answer. But yes, you've got to be very aware that your previous exam questions that probably were delivered in a closed book invigilated environment will not directly translate into that open book environment. Yep, that's a good time to point that out, my son. So the take-home exam, which I'm not going to go into, but you can use it as a file upload. It can go through, turn it in. And traditionally, it's used quite a lot in humanities, not in STEM areas. And it does deliver the possibility for much higher level thinking. But anyway, we'll leave the take-home exam. If anyone wants to talk to me about take-home exams for next year, I'm more than happy to chat with you about it. Okay, so let's have a look at this idea of open book, open web exams. Now, people are very divided in the literature about open book and open web exams. I've chosen to pick out some of the positive literature about how open book, open web exams can very positively impact student behaviour. So out of these couple of papers here, you'll see they're not, this one in particular, the BETS one, is not particularly recent. So open book and open web exams are not something brand new. It's just that the majority of people don't actually utilise them. So some of the really positive things that open book and open web exams can do is that they can bring the student into the centre of what you're asking them to do. You can really encourage creative thinking because you're no longer expecting them to have memorised absolutely everything. So you can think much more about application. You can place them in the role of the decision maker potentially. So if you have a case study, for example, asking them to make a decision based on information that they've gathered through your course, it can reduce feelings of anxiety, it can increase confidence, and it can increase learning. So this is where I said right back at when I was talking about what was an examination, this particular study, which comes out of this Myra paper, did a very big study of open book and closed book exams and interviewed students after having taken both. And most students indicated that they had significantly higher levels of learning, or they perceived that they had had higher levels of learning during the examination process. So you could argue that, yes, because that's the first time they've opened up their notes from that course and wow, they learned something, if you wanted to take a quite cynical approach. But I guess as a teacher, ultimately what you want your students to do is to learn something. And whether that happens in week 1 or week 2 of semester, or whether it happens during the exam, I think we have to take that as a positive. I don't know if we've got time for people to throw some things into the chat about what negative impacts they can see of open book, open web exams, but not thinking about academic integrity, because that's the easy one. We're all going to say, yeah, well, they're just going to cheat. But can you think from a student perspective, what might be some of the negative aspects of having all of those resources available to you to do your exam? I'll give you a few minutes just to think about that. Yeah, that's a good point, Gabrielle. Excellent point, Masam. Yes, that's right. Yes. Yep. Oh, you guys are all over it. Absolutely, yes.
Beth, just because we're recording this, you might want to read out some of the comments that you think are particularly useful, just because the people on the recording won't otherwise have them.
Sure. We do keep hold of the chat as well. But yes, you're absolutely right. So some of the themes that are coming through here are about students getting lost in the amount of information available to them. So that feeling of being overwhelmed, especially I feel for students who have perhaps not prepared as well as they should have or could have for an exam. And yes, we can say, well, that's their problem. But what it means is that you might not actually be testing what you think you're testing in an open book exam situation. Yes, so Kate, you've hit the nail on the head, because they think that they can look all the answers up, but then they're absolutely, swamped by all that information. One of the really interesting things which is coming across from your comments as well, yes, students believe that they must provide the perfect answer, Tony said. That is absolutely 100%. The number of students who have said to me, I just doubted myself constantly. So in a closed book exam, you've got to go with the answer that you think is the best answer. Whereas in an open book exam, you can constantly be going back and checking whether you've got all of the components that you think might be relevant to that exam. So although the positive side of it is increased confidence, I would actually argue there's a little bit of decreased confidence in your own ability to recall the most useful information to answer a question. Yeah, John's just said about over-quoting and less summary paraphrasing. I think in some disciplines, yes, that could absolutely be a risk, that you can copy and paste something, put some quotes around it, and then just move on. So that's awesome, guys. You've absolutely hit the nail on the head. The one thing that I don't think has come up, actually, although probably touched, Kate's comment there probably touched on it about not bothering to study, is many students have said to me, I actually didn't feel anxious enough. I wanted to feel more anxious, because that little bit of anxiety and that little bit of adrenaline really improves my performance. And I didn't have that, because I was sitting at home in my comfy spot, maybe in my pajamas, all of that sort of thing. You didn't have all of those usual things around you. So I think it's not, and we can't control how a student is preparing themselves in that sense for an exam, but I think keeping it in your mind is actually quite useful when you're writing your exam questions. Okay, so I've got a few ideas here, which hopefully addresses what my son was talking about ways of rejigging your course content to make your exam questions more suitable for an online and open book exam. So this comes from, these are not, I can't claim these ideas, and they're not actually that recent. I think the paper was 2011 that I've pulled these from. But I really like the way that it gives you lots of ideas about how to create an open book, open web exam question. So the authors suggest looking at newspaper articles or current affairs stories and finding one that reports lots of facts, maybe lots of facts, lots of figures. Reading that story with your academic glasses on and thinking, could this story provide some impetus or stimulus for independent thought from my students? Then you can add to that story, maybe with some links to do with professional standards or images which increase the context with which you're asking students to interrogate that story. Revisit the learning outcomes, go back to your learning outcomes and say, does this little scenario or story that I've created actually help me to test those learning outcomes? If it does, then I think you need to think really clearly about what you want the students to actually do with that information. So what's the assessment task? What do you want them to do? Do you want them to compare and contrast something? Do you want them to come up with a treatment protocol? Do you want them to come up with a way of testing whether one thing works better than another? And make it really clear that you're looking for critical analysis of the information that you've provided them with the application of theories, background information that you've provided in your course. One of the things that's really important to avoid when you are writing an open book, open notes or open web exam question is too much detail. What you don't want the student to do is get totally bogged down in an enormous Excel spreadsheet, for example, that provides lots of micro data. Because what you're really looking for is the student's ability to apply knowledge, not necessarily to dig down and look at that micro data. Make sure that what you're asking the students is quite structured, because if it's not, the students are going to get lost in the story that you've created or the context that you've created. And also, interestingly, don't give them too much time to complete that question. Although you want them to show some analysis of thought, what you don't want them to do is disappear down rabbit holes for too long. So having a clear timeline that you expect the students to answer that question. Oh wow, it was much older than I was imagining. 2004 actually. So there's the reference down there that I've stolen those ideas from. So now I've just got a couple of examples. How am I going for time? I'm doing okay, I think, Matthew. Yeah. I've got a couple of examples that come from my school. So this particular exam question was delivered as a file, download and then upload through Turnitin. And I mentioned to you about adding a reflective question. And this is just to demonstrate what I mean by that. So, and it's as simple as adding a sentence which says, we examined the following equation in lectures. So immediately you've placed the student in a part of the course that you're then expecting them to pull some information from. This particular equation appeared in the lecture notes, but then this part of the question is where the answers will be there, but they will not be specifically as I've put them in this question. So I'm really directing the student to the appropriate part of the course, but then I'm expecting them to use their knowledge to do some application. This is another one that comes from my school. This is one of our soils colleagues. And I really like the way he's created this question. My advice to him was some simple formatting would probably make that question more accessible to more students. Our international students struggled with this question, probably because there's a lot of information in a very dense area. So a bit of simple formatting there would probably have improved the way that the students could actually understand what he was asking. But he created a really nice scenario where, and this was a real scenario, these are Ron's cousins who all farm different parts of Australia, and they all met up on Zoom to talk about problems on their farms. The other thing I like about this question was the way he clearly stated what he wanted the students to do with that information. So identify their soil problems and then discuss one management practice. The students really liked this question. You can see I've left in here, one of the students said, firstly, this is the best written question of my undergrad. So a student, there were students that really enjoyed the way that that question was worded. So this, I think, is quite an authentic question, but it also improves integrity because it is not possible to Google the answer here. You can probably Google vague ideas about what you might do to solve this problem, but you're not going to get a perfect answer that you can pull off the internet. Okay, so we've talked a lot. We're nearly there with my bit. I think there's about 3 or 4 more slides. I think what's really important to think about, especially if what we're asking the students to do is something new, be really, really aware that if you haven't asked them to do that particular task within the course, then the chances are they are not going to be prepared cognitively to actually answer that question. So if they haven't had any practice answering that style of question, I would be very careful about putting it into an exam. So Paul Moss is one of our learning designers. He has a blog which, if you're interested in sort of getting little updates about learning and teaching and education things, I would highly recommend following him. He has some really useful things, and I've pulled off one of his quotes that I really liked. So teaching to the test doesn't work, but teaching students about the test is imperative. So teaching them what you're going to expect them to do is absolutely essential. And doing that reduces the risk of academic integrity significantly, because they are prepared, they know what they're going to be expected to do, they won't be stressed by the question, and it's being stressed by the question is what leads to Googling, copying and pasting, and things that we would most likely like to avoid. He also suggests talking openly about the academic integrity policy. It is Academic Integrity Week this week. I didn't know there was a week for academic integrity, but there is. So now might be an excellent time to start talking to your students about what academic integrity is and why we really don't want them to fall into the trap of breaching the academic integrity policy. I just jumped ahead. So if you've got time, I highly recommend getting a friend, a critical friend within your faculty to look at what you're planning to do for your open book, open web exam. Adelaide Education Academy members are more than happy to look at exams if you want someone outside of your discipline to look at what you're planning to do. And I'm sure you have school or faculty learning and teaching committees that probably have a process to actually do this formally. But I'd highly recommend getting a colleague to look at it first. I don't know if any of you are making use of the sessions that the LEI is facilitating. This is obviously in the past, these ones up here, but they are running and all of the recordings of those sessions are available. I've put the web link down there where you can access all of the recordings of those sessions if you missed out on them, and there are still some to come about academic integrity checking and all that sort of thing. So thank you so much for listening to me. I'm going to now handball to Matthew to coordinate the examples from your faculty. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Beth and Nina Mani. Good morning, everyone. We've got a variety of people from our own part of the business going to talk to us this morning. What I might do is start off with the thing that I'm not sure that I can get right, which is sharing a video. Now, I know that videos can be shared because of, well, anyway, let's not go into that, but let's just say we all learned about the capabilities of Zoom in semester one, for better or worse. But I will try and share a video from our colleague, Jessica Vivian-Wilkes, talking about communicating with students about the exam. So this is picking up the theme that Beth's already talked about, that the more we can make students feel comfortable and prepared for an exam, the better it will be. So I will now click on this and see if I can play it for you. I hope that you're seeing this now.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Jessica Vivian-Wilkes, and unfortunately I cannot be with you today because I am teaching face-to-face, which is awesome. Matthew asked me to talk to you about some of the information I helped create and made available to the students in commercial transaction. This course is a first year undergraduate compulsory that students have to take. It was taught in semester one and of course had an online exam following the pandemic. Of course, our students were anxious, and so we tried in our last session to ensure that they had the information they needed to lower that anxiety at least a little. We provided a set of slides, which I'm currently showing you on the screen. The first one was reminding them where to find some information university-wide before emphasizing when was the exam going to take place. We then told them where to find this exam, and it was going to be in a separate course on my uni, which was going to be available at a particular time. We then told them that it was important for them to have a look at this information prior to the day of the exam. And we highlighted a couple of things, including the online exam information and student declarations, so emphasizing the fact that they should submit their own work. We also reminded them that if they have an issue during the exam, to contact this number and not the course coordinator or their tutor. We also reminded them that while they have access to the course, they won't see the paper until the time as per the examination timetable, but also the fact that they needed to submit by a due date and time. We also told them it was a good idea for them to have access to a clock and make sure that they set up their time appropriately so they can keep track of that time. The other thing that we did to try to get them to actually look at this information was to providing them with a little quiz. A quiz that you can import through the import from Commons here that you will find in any course that you are coordinating. So once you're in that page, you can click on the exam readiness checklist. And Dr. Cheryl Pope, I have to say, it was not created originally by me, was to create an exam readiness checklist. The aim of that checklist was to give students an opportunity to review the content in the course that I just showed you, the exam course, and tell them, have you thought about a backup plan? What happens if there is a problem? What is your strategy in terms of time management and your schedule? And you can, of course, once you've imported this, add it and tweak it to your own particular circumstances. But to kind of give a little bit of a carrot and ensure that students just take a few minutes and think about this, we said to them, if you submit the quiz, you will be able to access the answer to the 2019 exam of a particular question. Therefore, telling them, if you take the time to review the notion in the course, in the exam course, here is a little kind of present for you. And this was really helpful, and students really appreciated the fact that they were able to do so. So hopefully this has been useful to you, and I'm sure the rest of the session will be as well. Have a fantastic day.
I'll thank Jessica in her absence for that. Jessica's teaching at the moment, so she very kindly agreed to do that. We heard some really good feedback from students in that course about feeling more comfortable with the online exam. And I think that one part of the story is the more students know what they're getting, the more they've seen the site, the more that they have an idea about what's coming up, the more comfortable they'll be. And the video share worked, so that's good. We might take a journey across the road. I think Associate Professor Janice Loftus, the head of the discipline of accounting, is with us, and she's going to talk about the way in which she's used question banks and used the design of multiple choice questions to promote academic integrity and reduce the possibility of students breaching their obligations.
Well, of course, it'll help if I unmute myself first. Yes, thank you for the opportunity to share some of the ideas that I've been trialing in my courses. So I've got a few things to show here. And the first one is that a technique I've introduced in accounting theory, which is a third-year accounting course. And this one is in the mid-semester test, so I'll just take you to that and then share the screen as soon as I've got it loaded. Okay, so in this mid-semester test, I was giving students a range of questions. So I'll just go into that question bank to show you what I've been doing here. So they're given two cases here. If we just go into this bank. So what we have are two quite similar cases, and this, so they've got, so here's the case data here, basically that paragraph there, and this paragraph here. So the case that they're looking at has the same level of complexity, but students would be randomly assigned one of these two questions, and they're given quite different instructions to do of what to do with this one, with the same case. So in the first one, given this scenario, this case, they have to explain whether the function room should be accounted for as an asset. So that task would involve analysing the facts of the case against the definition and recognition criteria for an asset. With the same set of facts, other students were being asked to describe an accounting policy. So a different task. Here they'll have to talk about how they're going to measure it as well as, but they're explicitly told you do not need to provide reasons for your policy. So the answers up here to this question would be giving reasons why this should be an asset. Over here, they're giving a more descriptive account of how to account for it, but they're not being rewarded for giving reasons about why it should be an asset. And so this was, these two variations here were aimed at stopping students from, or detecting when students were collaborating on answers, because if they, and we did find a number of instances where students did not realize that they had a different case from someone that they were sharing thoughts with. So we have another one here in the same course. And this one was in a fairly recent test that they've just done this last week. And in this case, they were given 2 different cases. Again, the case is very much the same. And this is, the strategies here were not just trying to detect and discourage collaboration, but we also have a problem with students downloading rehearsed answers. So they might be working on their own, but they're just using some material that they have and then just doing some minor modifications to it and cutting and pasting from their own materials or from my lecture notes and examples and so on into these answers. So often their explanations and their practice questions that they will have, identified who the stakeholders are, and they'll be, this is an ethics question applying an ethics decision model called the DECIDE model. And so they had to, in a more comprehensive task, they would be asked to identify stakeholders, to identify which principles were relevant, and then evaluate alternative outcomes, or identify some alternative strategies or alternative options, courses of action, and then evaluate them in terms of how they would affect the stakeholders and the ethical principles that they thought were relevant. But so they've got a lot of, there were a number of planned answers like that got dumped into the space after the question. But the question actually was a lot narrower than this. The question first, so one variation was Lee identified the key stakeholders as being the leisure division and employees of leisure division and senior management. And so if they are using some rehearsed answers rather than actually reading the facts of the case and reading what they're being asked to do, then they would tend to do their evaluation on, any stakeholders that they could find in the case rather than the ones they're being specifically asked to do. And likewise, they, instead of having to figure out which principles were relevant, they were told. Okay, so to evaluate this in terms of integrity. So if they were downloading, rehearsed answers, then chances are they've got the wrong principle there. And in fact, we found a number of cases that is where the whole answer was about different stakeholders and different principles. Very similar version. It's very simple to make a different version of it down here. So here we've got 2 different, the same leisure division employees, but this time managers of other division. And this time the ethical principle is objectivity. So it was quite easy in this scenario, this type of question, to create some variations, but it forced them to be quite specific to looking at their skills in evaluating the ethical outcome. It was one particular step of applying the DECIDE model. And so this was trying to address that problem, not only of collaboration, but also with the cut and paste answers from their own work, even when they're not collaborating. One of my colleagues introduced another technique, and I noticed that when we were going through Beth was talking about multiple choice and having about 4 or 5 alternatives with the multiple choice, and talking about feasible alternatives. And very often with multiple choice, where they're quantitative ones, we look at what mistakes would they make to come up with this alternative number, particularly with accounting ones where it's quite often quantitative. And typically, when I'm checking and reviewing multiple choice tests with my colleagues and so on, I check, that could I possibly make a mistake and come up with that number, or is this just a waste of a distractor? But one of my colleagues had a very interesting idea, and he had some very similar cases, right? So they had the same similar scenario, what they were doing, and they had to do some calculations, what would be the carrying amount of the lease obligation and things like that. But instead of all of the numbers, and you would have two different versions of the question, but instead of all of the A, B, C, D options being something from that case, 2 were from the case they had, and 2 were from the other alternative question on the same case. So when you pick, say, option C, there's no way you would ever get alternative C from that set of numbers. You would only get alternative C if you were actually doing a different question that wasn't even on your quiz paper. So that was a very, I thought, a very innovative way of detecting when people were just looking at somebody else's answer. Now I wanted to, so far what I've been talking about has all been, about fairly negative stuff, really, detecting people who are collaborating or cutting and pasting their own prior work instead of doing the task. So I wanted to talk about something a little bit more positive, and this is what I was doing in this other course. So postgraduate course, and it relates a little bit to what Beth was saying about the open book, open web, but not really open web because it's not a complete access, it's constrained resources. And in this task, I've been trying to look at I'm trying to assess whether students can, I'm trying to assess a skill in a real world application of being able to find information in a company's annual report, in particular the financial statements, because this is an accounting course. So typically, I can't often test this sort of thing in a paper-based test because, if I were to give them a company's annual report and ask them to find some figures in it, I would probably destroy a forest for the sake of the test. So this has been fantastic use of an online facility because I can send them the annual report. I just email it to them through the Canvas email, and so they've got the annual report. They know they're going to use this annual report, so we make sure that everybody's got access to it. There's no worries about whether the internet is going to have a problem accessing some company's website or something, because I've sent them the report, and it's a company's real report. And they do a test. So here they are having to find particular information. So, how much income tax was paid by PushPay during the year ended 31st of March 2019. And down here, what was the total amount of the borrowing? So they've got to go and find this information in the annual report. And the nice thing about financial statements is that they have comparative figures. So then I can use 2019 and 2020 as alternate questions, even with the same annual report. And so they have to know which financial statement to look at. For instance, how much tax was paid? Well, we don't go and look in the profit and loss statement. We need to go and look in the cash flow statement so that we get the cash-based number instead of the accrual-based number. But if I had said and one of the other alternatives was what was the tax expense, then they have to go and look at they have to know to go to look at the profit and loss statement for that item. So they need to know which financial statement to go to find this information. Now, and be able to retrieve that information from the statement, and then they just write their number in this. Now, that was quite useful because it tested their skill about doing this. Now, if they're employing some alternative strategy, such as doing a search function in the PDF document to try and find it, because they don't have a clue about how to find anything in a financial statement. So they just use a search function like some kind of shortcut. Well, it's no shortcut, okay? It would be like looking for the needle in the haystack, because you imagine how many times the word income tax might appear in an annual report, or how many times the word borrowings appears in an annual report. But a lot of the times, you know, when they were doing a search function, they would come up with a different number because it would be in a different context and not actually be the reported number. Or they could spend a whole lot of time, because when they put it into the search function, it finds 3,000 mentions of that one item. Okay, so it does makes other strategies like search functions, instead of having the appropriate skill, very either cumbersome to apply, because it would actually take longer. It's not a shortcut, and also would be in many instances retrieving the wrong information, and you could only find that in a completely wrong section of the annual report, which is how I analyse where they got some of their strange numbers from. And so this was again the capacity to have multiple questions, which we all know about. Also reduced the sort of a collaboration of a shared effort. Let's all sit around with our annual report. So that I found that was giving me some integrity. Not so much. It had some aspects about integrity from whether the students were actually not doing their own work, but also integrity in terms of, is my test well aligned with what it is, with the skill that I am trying to assess. Okay, so I'll stop sharing that unless anybody still wants to see it. I'm quite happy to share my tests, because I'm a realist and I know that my tests appear all over the internet.
Well, look, thanks very much, Janice. I think that really is a very helpful summary of some of the things that you've been doing. I think we'll keep going with the multiple choice question ideas here. We have a couple of presenters who have some interesting stories to share on that. I might go now to Colette Langos in the law school to talk about using multiple choice questions in the commercial law courses in semester 1. And then after that, we're going to transition over to economics and talk to Virginie, but we'll go to Colette first.
Oh, hi, everybody. I'm happy to join you, even though it was a little late. I've just finished giving a Zoom seminar, so I'm late to the party. But yes, I did have, I think on the whole, I could say very good experiences with running multiple choice question exams. So last semester, I was responsible for Commercial Law 1, which had several hundred students, and also Business and Corporations Law, which was a very different cohort. It was master's students, and there are about 200 in that cohort. And for both the undergraduate and the master's cohort, I actually had very, very good results come through for the multiple choice question exam. So it seemed to be that students certainly handled the format very well. I think they liked the fact that they didn't have to write long legal responses on some of these legal topics, and could simply work through the critical analysis themselves and then select the most correct answer from the responses I had provided. So it certainly still required the students to think about legal problems in a critical way, but rather than writing out the process, they had to think about the process and then just select the most correct response. So it's always good to begin with the positives, I think. The negative side was that we did have exam results come through, which were, on the whole, looking at several semesters worth of results from the course, a little on the higher side. And so I think that poses a challenge for those of us who write multiple choice exams to make sure that we pitch those quizzes or multiple choice exams correctly. And that can always be a little bit of an area where you need to gain that little bit of practice, and you really need to have a practice run to gauge, to make that assessment as to how you need to pitch those questions. you don't want to make it too hard. At the same time, we don't want to make it too easy. So from that point of view, I've learned a lot from my experiences in the first semester and what I need to do to perhaps tailor those questions and make them a little bit more challenging for the students that I have in semester 2 and trimester 3. And of course, going back into the exam statistics is very helpful for that. So we can actually see what portion of questions were answered, you know, at a very high percentage rate, and which questions proved a little bit more challenging for students, and make those necessary changes based on the data that is provided to us through the MyUni system. I also had an interesting experience from a process point of view in terms of setting up these online quiz exams. As you would probably all be aware, there are many different ways in which we can do that. So one of the ways is to create what we are known as question banks, as we sometimes create for quizzes, which are not exams, but just quizzes, other assessment items, where we can have a huge number of questions, and then sort of depending on how many questions we'd like to pose for the assessment, they get picked out of there at random and assigned to students. The challenge from where I found anyway in using that sort of system is that whenever you make a change, you need to remember to make the change in the actual question bank, and so that that change can be carried over to the questions when they are given to the students. And the other way is to actually write those questions into the question bank directly, which I ended up doing for both of the exams. And that was because I had a defined number of questions that I wanted the students to take, and I knew that I wanted all of the students to take those particular types of questions. So in the end, I opted for sort of direct delivery of questions, which I wrote in the actual questions section, rather than using a question bank, which I often do for online quizzes. So again, that was a conscious decision I made just based on how easy it was to set things up for the very first time that we ran multiple choice quiz exams. Look, I'm happy to take questions about the experience that I had. I'm not sure what else I can relay to you at this point based on my experience.
Well, look, thanks, Colette. I think that's very helpful, actually. And, you know, these are courses where we have traditionally had what you would call a real exam. And because of the unusual situation this year, the decision was taken to have multiple choice exams.
Right.
And let's be frank, that saved the school a bunch of money on casual marking that there was no budget for at the moment that decision was made. So this is a financial decision, but it actually was quite a positive pedagogical experience in the sense that we found that we could target students' ability to understand and apply particular concepts probably in a better way than we could if we asked them to give a long discursive explanation. So it was a really positive experience. And probably the one thing that you didn't say, Colette, that I think is worth saying is that writing these loads and loads of multiple choice questions is a lengthy and soul destroying experience. So, you know, it does have a cost to set these up, but now that it's been done, then that's a good thing. We might go to Virginie. We've heard a couple of things that can be done to set up these multiple choice quizzes in a way to reduce the likelihood of integrity problems, and I know that she has done a few other good things in Principles of Economics on this front as well.
Thanks, Matthew. Yes, so I had the privilege and fortunate to step in the course in the midway through for Principle of Economics, and it's 600 students, so the stress was on for the online exam, but everything goes nicely. My worry was, of course, about the success of the students, where, as you just said, Colette, you want to set up multiple choice that are kind of at the right level, which is very, very difficult to figure out when it's the first time delivering like this. So what I've done is we had 12 different topics. So I said to the students, okay, I'm going to assess you on everything. I mean, it's an open book. So anyway, you have access to plenty of things. And for each topic, I created one little question bank, and actually two of them. One with what I call the easier questions, which are questions that I believe do not require you to be that genius, but if you want to pass for the course, well, you should be able to answer those. And two a bit more difficult questions that are being picked randomly from, so that these are aimed for the distinction HD students. So for each topic, I had 2 question banks and a bunch of questions in each of them, depending on the level. That gives me 48 questions. And then I had 2 questions for everyone that I said to them, if you want 100, you'd better be good. And nobody got 100. The other thing I've done was to say, okay, this is going to be randomized. So I randomized pretty much everything I could, randomize the question, randomize the answers. The way I've done the questions were a bit different from Janice, and I think that was a good idea, Janice, that you said that some people kind of crossed the answers of some question to try to detect integrity. I haven't done that. I just created the numbers in such a way that I test your understanding within the question, but I like the idea of cross-checking through a question, so I think I'll add that to mine. The other thing I've done, which I think was a bit controversial around the uni, but I thought worked well for me, was to lock the questions, and the main reason for that is its principle of economics. It's a non-specialized course, it's a big one, there's so much resources online that it's very, very hard to not have, you know, people getting 1 or 2 friends coming with them and searching online for answers. Having said that, I did communicate to the students. I sent them a big announcement saying, all right, this is how it's going to work. And I actually said exactly how I set it up, which is 2 easier questions, 2 tougher questions per topic, log questions, so you won't be able to go back. And I explained why I was doing that. I only had 1 student emailing me not being super happy with that, but only 1 out of 600, you know. I thought, well, that's pretty good. In terms of results, I was pretty happy. Well, I got someone who got a 6, which is quite remarkable on multiple choice, but that happened. The highest grade was 90, which I was hoping it would be a bit higher. That actually had me a bit off, because I thought, you know, I could get someone getting 94, 96 about, and I have this student in another course of mine and he's really, really good. So maybe I was a bit too enthusiastic, but the overall average was 62, which I think is about where I should sit. And yes, I kind of liked, so as Matthew said, it's a matter of money, matter of convenience, but also a matter of trying to test appropriately the students. They had other things during the semester, as Beth said. I mean, the other learning outcomes were tested during the semester. If there's anything I could do, I'd love to have a little journal article, but that creates other problems on who's answering. I think one of the positives for the international students, because we didn't have a little article where it's very wordy and sometimes difficult for them, I think the international student had a bit of a better experience in a way with that exam. So overall, I was pretty happy. I'm probably going to set up, I'm doing another big first year non-specialized course this semester. I think I may actually set it up like that too, because I thought it worked pretty well. So that's for my experience.
Great. Look, thank you very much to everyone. We're going to make a qualitative shift now away from the MCQs, but I do want to say that they can be a tremendous tool, and thank you very much for sharing, particularly the ways in which, both through using the system and designing the question, we can get some greater confidence about how students respond. We're going to move away from the MCQ land now, though, and go back to what would be a more traditional exam style, except for the way it's set up. And I'm going to ask Gabrielle Golding. I think I have the slide here, so I'm going to see if I can work out how to share that, and Gabrielle is going to speak to it. And that's not the slide. This is the slide. Here we go.
Thanks so much, Matthew. So traditionally for family law, we have a 2-hour exam, and it's based on a family law problem. So if something goes wrong in a family law context, either it's a matter that involves custody of children, parenting orders, perhaps it involves a divorce application, and then ultimately a property settlement between those parties. So with family law being such a dynamic and human area of the law, what I thought to do in this online environment was to create something that students could watch and then answer a series of questions. So there were 2 problem questions as we traditionally have, but they were sent out to students in the My Uni exam course as animation. They were narrated and put together by the wonderful Philip Elms over in the Faculty of Professions. Basically, my role in this was to set up the problem and to draft the script. And then Philip, with his wonderful skills, put together these very, I'm going to say, emotional kind of roller coaster of videos that students then needed to watch. So what I thought I might do, and students did respond very positively to this, I just made sure that rather than surprising them, you know, the week before with the change in exam format, that I let them know about all of this stuff really early, and that I gave them the instructions to the online exam, not the questions obviously, but the front cover page of instructions well before the exam took place, so that they felt comfortable with this new format, because as far as I'm aware, this format hasn't been used elsewhere in the university, and I'm told by Philip that it hasn't been used at other universities, so it was a bit of a gamble. What I might do, Matthew, is just share one of the videos so that you can see what this looks like. The feedback that I had from students was that they felt like they were engaging with real people and a real problem, and that certainly came through for us when we were marking, because you were seeing students who weren't just copying out notes in this open format. They were really engaging with what the characters were saying, and that of course is you know, far more engaged and active, I guess, an active response to the material that we were looking to test through the exam. So I'll play one of them. We probably don't have time to watch the entire thing, but you'll just get a bit of a feel for what it's like. So I'll just share my screen now. Okay, so you should see the My Uni page here. Really clear instructions. Please ensure that you open and read the exam paper. And this paper, it contains the instructions here that students were given beforehand. I gave students the scripts, and then here are the questions as they follow in relation to both of the videos. So the video itself, I'll play this first one.
Sarah and Matt met in high school during January 2019 while studying together in the school library for their Year 12 mathematics exam. Both are quite nerdy and hope to become mathematicians after they finish their university study. Notwithstanding their age, Sarah and Matt knew from the moment they met that they wanted to spend the rest of their lives together.
The numbers between us just add up, don't they, Sarah?
Yeah. We're the perfect equation.
On the 14th of February 2020, Sarah and Matt became engaged to one another. A celebration announced while out at dinner with both of their sets of parents at their favourite Italian restaurant in Hyde Park.
Mum, Dad, we have something wonderful to announce to you all. Sarah and I are getting married. In fact, by Saturday 29th of February next week, we will formally be husband and wife.
We just can't wait any longer. I don't want this wedding called off because of the coronavirus panic and the government restrictions on large gatherings. In fact, I've already picked out my dress, and Matt reckons his family's backyard where he grew up would be the perfect setting. It'll easily fit within our tiny budget.
Both sets of parents were overjoyed with the couple's news and were entirely supportive of their intention to be married, but did not bother to make any formal record of that.
I think we all just know that this is right for you both. We just want the best for you as our children and to see you happy.
At the time of their wedding, on the 29th of February 2020, both Sarah and Matt were still quite young. Sarah was 17 years old, turning 18 later in the year on the 20th of June. Matt had recently turned 18 on the 1st of February 2020. Sarah considered her and Matt to be fortunate to have their best friend from high school, Kate, officiate their wedding. Even though Kate was not an authorised celebrant, it was the cheapest option for the couple, who, between them, only had $15,000 of savings. Just a week before, Kate had told the couple that it was fine for her to officiate the wedding.
You guys are safe with me. In fact, I literally just watched a 20-minute YouTube video on how to perform a wedding ceremony, and I know exactly what I need to do and say.
Okay. So, yeah, the saga goes on for another few minutes. Basically, like, you can start to sort of piece together the problems that we've got here. These are two parties, one who's of marriageable age, one who isn't. The fact that their parents have kind of informally consented to the fact that they can be married, but there's no formal record. And then they've got their friend Kate, who's not an authorised celebrant, conducting the marriage. And there's a few other issues that relate to a child that they eventually have down the track. So yeah, that's just a bit of a feel for what we did. I would totally do it again. It's not really that hard. And I think I just want to stress that it is, yeah, a totally doable thing. It's just the script drafting that takes a few goes.
Great. Thanks so much, Gabrielle. That's a lot of fun and a really good idea. We are getting towards the end, I promise. I'm going to go now to Mark Giancaspro. Mark, for evidently many sins in a past life, is one of the academic integrity officers in the law school. We, in fact, did not have a train wreck of a first semester on this front. But Mark's going to talk about the academic integrity from that perspective, and in particular about how useful we found having students submit responses through Turnitin.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. First of all, apologies. I have shockingly bad hay fever, which is why I've been putting the video off, because I've been coughing and spluttering the whole time. I'm sorry. Thanks very much, Matthew. Thanks everybody who's presented so far. Gabby loved those videos, as you know. I think that's just fantastic, and I'm contemplating doing something similar in my courses. Yeah, so from an academic integrity perspective, I'm not sure I'm going to say anything that's overly enlightening, because I think you could all probably appreciate some of the things or sort of perceptions that I had anyway, or findings that we had. But what we found was, this being, of course, the first time we've tried non-invigilated online exams, there was an initial surge in detections of academic misconduct, and I thought, oh, God help us, what's happening here? We're going to get a whole heap more. It's going to snowball. But then, to my surprise and my co-AIO in the law school, Associate Professor David Brown, things leveled out. And in the end, we actually didn't have any more cases than we normally would detect. I thought that was actually one really interesting finding in itself. If I had to put a finger on why I think that might be, and why I think it will probably be the case for other schools moving forward as well, notwithstanding that plagiarism was the #1 thing that was detected, which I think stands to reason, but the fact that we actually told students in advance, look, you're now putting your paper through Turnitin, obviously now there's another set of digital eyes looking at your paper alongside ourselves. So I think that sort of deterred them from contemplating using online material and whatnot, you know, trying to cut and paste slabs into their papers. You know, we made it pretty clear that not only are we familiar with most of the literature, but now the computer can pick up things that we can't. Some students did try still to, you know, thread little snippets of information from the internet into their papers. Thankfully, they were the minority, but it did make it pretty clear that, you know, technology did entice some people to try and fool the system as it was, but Turnitin again sort of highlighted that for us. So if there's anything we missed, the computer was able to pick it up. So yeah, I think technology, while it might open a few doors, which is what we were talking about before, in terms of enticing students maybe to try and cheat their way through to a better result. Not only will that probably be counterproductive because they've become overwhelmed very quickly by the volume of information out there on Wikipedia, but also I think the fact that we warn them, you know what, we can now actually use this tech to, you know, peruse your papers beforehand, as it were. That seemed to me to be the thing which probably works best. And frankly, I'm surprised it took a pandemic for us to consider doing online exams before. I think this is a good thing. Students did anecdotally tell us that they liked the convenience of being able to complete the exam remotely in their own comfortable settings. I didn't see anything in the marks which indicated that there was some overwhelming push in the skew of grading. So the spread of grades, certainly in my courses and talking to colleagues in board, appeared to be about the same. So there might have been a slightly more positive skew, but I don't necessarily attribute that to the use of tech. I think what was actually happening was, and I'm sure we all did the same, we put in an extraordinary amount of effort to try and provide additional supports for students this semester, given it was the first time we did online exams. So I think a lot of the sort of positive skews that we were seeing, or slightly more positive skews, was actually probably more the product of our effort rather than students getting information more easily off the internet. So again, I don't know if there's anything overly insightful in there, but I think this is definitely a good thing moving forward. I think we should have done this a long time ago, and I think using some of the methods that we've all heard about today, we can make it a really positive experience for our students. So happy to take any queries, otherwise maybe I'll probably leave it there.
Great, thanks very much, Mark. I'm going to wrap it up with 4 very small thoughts, and I will keep them short. Obviously, at this point, we're all committed to what we're going to do this semester, but it is worth asking yourself, thinking to the future, is an online exam definitely what you need? I have to make a disclosure here, given that I'm running the session on online exams. I got rid of the online exam in my course and turned it into an assignment, because once it was not an invigilated exam, I didn't see any value in it, but that's a separate question. As I think we've talked about a couple of times, getting up Bloom's taxonomy to find the non-Googleable answer really is the key in these scenarios. Once students have access to all the information in the world, then you really need to think about, are you getting them to apply and evaluate and so on. Obviously, one of the ways to fail at this is to try and reuse old content. Far more of this is in circulation than we would like to think, so that becomes a problem. And probably the point that I wanted to make, which is the point that I made to our staff in semester 1, is don't stress too much. Anything can be fixed. What do I mean by that? I mean that, let's suppose it all goes wrong. Is it the end of the world? Well, no, of course not. And the example of this really is the multiple choice questions. The problem is, you know, what happens if you get it wrong? What happens if it's too easy? Well, the answer is you fix it. Yeah, I'm the imbecile who wrote to 1,000 students in semester 1 and said your multiple choice question was too easy. We've pulled down your exam mark by 10%. Now I probably got struck off a few Christmas card lists, but it worked perfectly well, right? So if the results end up too high, you pull them down. If the results end up too low, you push them up. You know, it isn't the end of the world. Calibrating MCQs is a hard business, and sometimes it works and sometimes you don't get it right. And you know, that's not the end of the world. You just fix it, right? You fix it in the wash up, or you have the assessment monitoring committee fix it in the wash up as it transpires, but that's only a technicality, right? Yeah. These things can be fixed. So it doesn't really matter if things go wrong on that front. If you made it too hard or too easy, that doesn't matter. The only problem is if you make it so everyone can cheat. And that's really what these sessions are talking about, you know, how we can make sure that we're keeping an eye on the integrity stuff. Now, this is a really great question that's come up in the chat, and the answer to it stinks, unfortunately. That is, if the student has submitted through the quiz, can you run it through Turnitin? No. Is the short answer to that, because what you would have to do is copy out everything that every student wrote into a Word document and then yourself upload that to the, you know, check my own course that runs things through Turnitin, which will drive you crazy. So, we had kind of two paths in our part of the shop in the first semester. Either it was MCQ, in which case we weren't going to run it through Turnitin for the obvious reason, or it was substantive and it was a file upload that could go through Turnitin. It would be great to have an integration so that the short answers in the quiz engine go through Turnitin. We ain't got that one now. Now I'm just going to try and curate some questions here. I know we're running short on time, but there's a question here. Is it possible to have an exam in two parts, one with a file upload and one MCQ? Yes, absolutely, you can do that. So John says you do that using it as an assignment. Now, John is very good at these things, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind if you got in touch with him and said, hey, how do I do it? Most of the LEI team should be able to help you with that as well. But yes, you can absolutely have, the bank of MCQs and then the file upload as well. And that might be a nice way of doing it. The fact is that in the courses where we went entirely MCQ, we did it for the convenience. But certainly, if you want to be testing some different skills and some different attributes, then I think it very much becomes important to think about maybe the half and half sort of approach. Any other questions, or is there anything that anyone would like to share with us that they did that worked really well that we haven't covered already as well? Virginie?
I just would like to add something. When I wrote my multiple choice, I copy pasted each and every one of them into Google to make sure that students couldn't just copy paste and get an answer. And it took me forever, but at least I was sure that if I just try to copy paste, they can't get the answer. So that was tiring, but yeah, it worked out pretty well.
That's good. And Lisa, did I see a hand raise?
I unmuted because just something I've played with and I'm fairly happy with the results so far is I tell my students from day one, collaboration is good, collusion is bad. And the difference is your recognition of collaboration. If you collaborate and don't share about it, you're cheating. But if you say, it's just like citations. I'm collaborating with the author of this work, I'm quoting their work, and now I'm putting my own spin on it. So I tell my students, even in an exam, one of the first things they do is they announce who they collaborated with, what part each person contributed in that collaboration. Mainly they just do two of them, but sometimes it's 3 or 4 together. And then I make it clear, the end result has to be individually different, and I'll compare it with each other. And even when they collaborate, they'll still get different grades because the driving force who knows the most will get the better grades because they put in their own words. But the others, even if they put it in their own words, you can see if they don't really understand, they're totally dependent on their collaborators. But more often than not, you can see that they actually learnt more. To me, exams are more about learning than about, as well as proof of learning. And so they actually learn in the process of being able to do the exam. And I get far less cheating. I've only had 1 or 2 where I feel they still did try to cheat because they don't declare their collaboration. But what happens then usually is the collaborator shares, and it's the one who's trying to cheat who doesn't, and therefore they're exposed anyway. So, and I think that mimics real world more. There are very few jobs where you work solo. You always work in a team. And just being able to say, we did this together, but this is my component, and this is where we spun off, and this is my original work. So I've had a fair bit of success with that.
Great, thanks very much for sharing that, Kate. And I see in the chat, Lisa has asked a question, which is, are people aware that students can upload their questions to Course Hero or Chegg and get a real-time answer? And of course, that is a problem. I think there are a bunch of ways of dealing with this. Virginie has identified one here, which is making the students sit one question at a time and not allowing them to jump about. Another, which is, I'm going to just kind of, I think that's very important. Another, which I think is around as well, is don't allow the students more time than they need for this. So, if they're doing multiple choice, for example, make them churn through it fairly quickly. so that it kind of reduces the time they've got for doing that. I know some colleagues, and I don't necessarily encourage this practice, who set out deliberately to write the longest, most complicated exams they possibly could, on the basis that that would reduce academic integrity problems. And it did seem to stop academic integrity problems, but I think there are some costs associated with that I'm uncomfortable with. Now, there's a suggestion in the chat box here that invigilated online exams would be a nice solution, and I've lost track of the number of times I've been advocating for invigilated online exams around the university, but I can tell you there's only ever been one answer. So you can take from that as you will. John has just put in the chat some details about Mobius, which used to be called Maple TA, which for anyone on the kind of the STEM side, and I suppose that would be particularly the maths part of economics, might find some benefit for that. And there are some licenses available for next year if you're interested. So if you are interested in that, then by all means get in touch with John. Any final thoughts before we close out?
Just like to follow up a bit Lisa's comment about Chegg and Course Hero. I think it's an ethical or legal issue, I'm not sure what it is, but essentially if we find that students have plagiarized via those companies both publish on their website that they will ban any student who uses them to cheat. And so essentially we need to be able to tell them this student cheated from your thing so that they can be blacklisted, because there's no point them being willing to blacklist students who use them for plagiarism if we can't then tell them this student plagiarized. So I don't know what we do about that, but I think there needs to be a means by which we can get students blacklisted from the cheating sites.
I don't think our integrity policies would actually allow us to communicate to an external organisation that somebody had been caught cheating in an exam.
Exactly, that was my point, the fact that there seems to be a sort of ethical legal issue there, but I think it's kind of reverse. If they have said this material is not to be used for cheating and plagiarism, we'll blacklist anyone who does, then if they are the only people that we notify, I think it should be legally acceptable. Basically, especially if we could pre-publish to the students, any student who is found to have plagiarized from these sites, that site will be notified and you will be blacklisted. Then it's self-declared up in front. It's not, we're not publicizing it to anyone else except the people who they have actually technically defrauded, I guess. But anyway, I just wanted to raise the issue because
I think that is an interesting issue you raise for sure. I suspect that the answer is, on the very rare occasion when we can definitely prove the source of it, then there might be some call for that. I don't think, on my understanding of the current policy, we could do it. But if that situation arose, there'd be no reason that you couldn't seek some advice from LQS on whether there might be a way of avoiding the usual confidentiality arrangements. But I'd certainly suggest I wouldn't advocate going and doing it on your own. I think you'd want to get a bit of top cover from the university first. But yeah, I mean, it is a losing battle, I think.
How effective could it be anyway? Because if the person's going to that extreme, then how would an external organisation know that it was the banned student anyway? Or could be their sibling, their friend, themselves with a different ID. I mean, I just don't think it's very nice that these organisations offer to maintain such a high standard of integrity, but how practically enforceable is it?
I think that's absolutely right, Janice. My sense is that it's in the design of the assessment that we can make some progress here in terms of integrity. I think in the mopping up part of it, it's going to be too hard and too late at that point. Beth, did you have any final thoughts before we close out?
No, I just want to thank everyone. You've given me some great ideas as well, and good luck with exams.
Yes, thank you very much to all of the presenters in particular. I'm very grateful for your willingness to take part. Thank you to Beth. Poor Beth has been doing this roadshow around the university for schools and faculties and everyone else, and it's very much appreciated. So thank you so much for your time, Beth. Thank you to everyone for your contributions, and all the best for the exam writing. I think in our school exams are due today, so the last flurry of exam writing might be what we're seeing here. Or for those who are maybe a touch behind schedule, the imminent flurry in the next few days of exam writing. Thanks very much, everyone, and all the very best.
Thanks.